Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Thunder, and this is Case Closed. Case Closed. And we have a special show for you today. It's Black History Month. And we are about at the end of Black History Month. And I thought it important, very much so, to do a show where we reflect on, we talk about the significance of Black History Month, and we of course we have our own sort of twist on this. And so, Case Closed, Black History, a guide to the future, and some things that we're going to be discussing, other than interest in and fascination with the past. Why should we study history? What useful models of socioeconomic and political change can we learn from history? Are these models a reliable guide to our actions today? Is there a danger of embellishment and downright fascination, or falsification rather, of history in an attempt to ennoble and glorify our community? What are some of the current events, moments that will make history? What are some primary causal agents in Black history? Is Black history mainly an artifact of economic and technological changes? Has Black history mainly been moved forward by great individuals in the movements that they inspired? Is Black history the result of the evolution of ideas, and hence mainly the work of the idea generators and spreaders? So, this and more today on Case Closed. Let's go. Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What's happening? Go ahead and take it away, Ike.
What's going on? How y'all doing, man?
Yep.
We live? We on?
We are. Ike, you there? All right. He had to turn his camera off. He is in Africa, in Accra, Ghana, and from time to time the internet has not cooperated.
My bad, my
But
bad, my bad. This time it was even worse. Like I actually muted myself, and I've been talking this whole time.
ah,
My bad, my bad. But anyways, this panel needs no introduction. Okay, Dr. Ron O'Neill will be joining us after he winds down his stream, if his stream is indeed still going on. We have Dr. Tia San Johnson, we got Green Gorilla, we got BGS, got Dr. Thunder. Okay, and I would like to start out like this: in the political arena, okay, in the current political arena, I guess it's always been this way. There tends to be a problem with acknowledging progress, typically amongst progressives. There's always an idea of there is more work to be done. If you're chasing down a more equal, more equitable world, which tends to be the project of progress, right? There tends to be a reluctance to acknowledge the progress that has been made, right? Because there's a fear that, okay, well, if I say things have changed, then I got to shut down shop and reduce funding for some of the programs that I have and all this other kind of stuff. So there's always the talk of, well, we even need more now more than ever, diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever it may be, right? So I want to use that to ask this question: has Black History Month run its course? Is it still needed? And this is not a question about whether or not you want to abolish it. It's a question of what progress has been made with regards to the ends towards which Black History Month was targeted. And I believe the end is to the focus on the contributions of African Americans in the United States. So we could start with Dr. Tia San Johnson. Um, has Black History Month run its course? Would be the provocative form of the question, but really we're getting at what progress has been made with regards to the ends towards which Black History Month was targeted, if you will.
here, one second before you answer that. Oh, actually, you know what? Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, damn, I lost my train of thought in just that moment. Oh goodness.
Rephrase the question, Ike.
Yeah.
My fault.
So again, there's a general tendency in the political arena, when it comes to progress, to not acknowledge progress because the work of progress is never done. So rather
Oh,
than say, hey, we've made some progress, but let's do some more, there tends to be just not never acknowledging progress. So I'm
right.
asking, has Black History Month run its course? The
Well,
ends to which it was targeted, what progress has been made in that regard?
I don't know if it necessarily ever can completely do so, especially considering the position of most African American ADOS FBA people in the country. I mean, at the end of the day, we see the kind of pushback we've been hearing against even African American studies over the year, and not just in the recent last month or two, but over the years. I mean, I'm basically an old teacher. I've been teaching for about 25 years, and I can tell you every year that I get a new crop of Black students in my class, especially as freshmen, the amount of information they have about their own culture, their own environment, their own communities is scarily low, as far as that. So, but the other aspect of Black History Month is it's also, become a political vehicle that, people have used to try and push, um, some type of materialist improvement, upgrade kind of dynamic in the Black community. And how effective that is can be debated about. But is there a place to focus on Black folks' contribution to society, so on and so forth? I know it's provocative for me to just say no, but I can't do that looking at these students that I get every year who really just take my class because They just want to know. They're just curious. But beyond that, um, if they don't get what they're looking for, they may not ever ask the question again. To be honest with you, I mean that's a quote. It's actually a quote from one of my students. So coming from that kind of background as a teacher, I'm probably a little biased in that sense, just because I'm concerned about the kids. To be honest with you.
Hmm. So there's a sense in which the work can never be done, and then there's a sense of the evolution of the project, if you will. Perhaps in the 1970s, it was okay to, or at what the project was about might have been, hey, let's show some flashcards with regards to African American contributions. But then we talk about African American history every month now, so we have to move the goalpost, if I were to say it in that kind of a way, to expand it, and so on and so forth, right? Not putting words in your mouth, but
Yeah, we because
well understood. Yeah.
the part where you were saying we talk about it every month. I missed that.
No, no, I was just saying that if indeed the idea was to focus on the contributions of African Americans, I would say between the 1970s and now, there's been a great deal of progress with regards to knowing these things, seeing it on social media, the degree to which it has infiltrated the general zeitgeist, that there's been progress in that regard. Would you agree, at least on that aspect?
I mean, I've seen posts. I don't know if I could manage, if I could, I don't know how I would measure progress in that sense. I don't, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? I can say I've seen a Twitter post about a historical event. I can't say if that's necessarily indicative of some type of structural advancement, even in terms of how much particularly young Black folk know about their own culture or history. I don't know if I can necessarily point out the correlation between the two. But I can say I've seen social media used to attempt to do so. I just don't know, to what extent it's succeeded.
Not to monopolize the conversation on you, Dr. Johnson, but do you think perhaps that, and it's just something for you to think about, you can give a quick answer now, perhaps Black History Month or a tool like Black History Month might not be the appropriate vehicle for getting into the issues that you're talking about. Like you could have a Black History Year, and perhaps you'll still have young folks not knowing anything about their history. Um, it's just a thought, right? Um, but Dr. Ronald Neal, shout out to you. I see you're here. You've been busy on your channel and
Oh yeah.
back to back streams. All right, Dr. Ron O'Neill. Okay, we're starting off the conversation here on this. We're talking about the political arena, generally speaking, and it tends to be there's a tendency not to acknowledge progress, right?
Mhm.
Because the work of progress is never done. So
Yeah.
there's more work to be done. There's more work to be done. There's more work to be done. It's easy to point this out in arenas where you don't like what the work that people are calling for is. Like, those people, the woke people are always saying that we need to be more woke and need to push more and more diversity,
Mhm.
equity, and inclusion. How about the progress, that kind of a thing? So the question now is, Black History Month was targeted towards focusing on the contributions of African Americans in the United States. What kind of progress has been made in that regard? Is Black History
Mhm.
Month still needed? Has Black History Month run its course,
Mhm.
Dr. Ron Neal?
Yeah. Well, I would say, let me answer your last question first. No, it hasn't run its course. Um, I think that it's an ongoing project to the extent that this country does not want to, or at least refuses to reckon with um, the reality of anti-blackness historically and all of its ugliness. There's always going to be a need for the historical, at least attention to the historical experiences of Black people. Um, as far as the whole notion of progress, I'm not so inclined to say that we've had lots of progress in advancing Black history over the decades. Yes, we've had achievement in terms of, you can look at the political arena, look at the political history of Black people over the last 50 years. We could talk about achievements. We could talk about achievements in terms of, higher education, the advancement of the black middle class over the last 50 years and what have you. We could talk about those things. And those things, interestingly, don't get the attention that is needed outside of kind of the demonization of it. That is stuff like, attacks on affirmative action or what have you. You know what I mean? And so um, uh, the project, it is ongoing. It has not reached its full potential. I guess the one way to put it like this, and this might make sense to you. Some have said this about Christianity, um, that Christianity is a good idea that has never been tried. Okay, and what they, of course, I think it should be obvious what they mean by that is that it's something that has not really been put into practice in a way in which we can see it manifest itself in a very robust way in the world. And I think that's where we are. When we talk about Black history, we're talking about, history as an intellectual endeavor. It's about so many things. It's about memory. And the reality is that there is an ongoing effort to suppress memory, or if not to suppress memory, to revise it in certain ways, to make it palatable to certain tastes and interests and what have you. There's a whitewashing of it, and so what the general public knows about Black people in history. If you look at popular culture, films, and what have you, it's a very socially engineered project. All right, and it's like recent. You see these recent films now that are coming out on different aspects of Black experience, stories about Emmett Till. We've had recent stuff about Harriet Tubman, stuff about different figures. So much of it is focused on women. Okay, and it is just it's revisionist. It's a revisionist kind of history that speaks to the interests of a certain group of people, and not just Black women, but to liberal white interests in particular that are comfortable with a certain version of the story of Black people. So yeah, it's an ongoing project.
Hmm.
Hey, let's acknowledge the super chatters. So first we have let's see here. We've got this was a DJ beside 1965 with the big $20 super chat. Thanks in advance for the discussion being had with this august assemblage of gentlemen and scholars. And then we've got another one here for 199. Thank you very much. The proper term is foundational Black American, and that's from Corey Green. Thank you very much. And BGS is in the back. I'll get him set. Take it away, Ike.
All right, Green Gorilla, you know the question on the table, and we're very targeted towards Black History Month, not Black history per se, but Black History Month, which is a particular project meant to focus attention. Any progress in that regard? What do you say?
First and foremost, you have to understand that Black History Month started off as Black History Week by Carter G. Woodson, and he was a Black historian. And you have to understand the reasons for which he began Negro History Week to begin with, which eventually morphed into Black History Month. I mean, the first thing he said is that the American educational system is failing Black Americans. He said that there is a role that African American educators have to play in order to fill in the lacuna or the gap related to the failure of the American education system. And he talked about the importance of Black folks knowing their history, because of course there's a phrase that you see again and again in popular culture, and it's basically, those people who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So I'm assuming that he understood that this is definitely the case with any group of persons, right? I mean, in general, universally or globally. And then, last but not least, he talked about Black folks' need for self-reliance. Okay, so I mean, in terms of whether or not the project of Black history is done, of course it's not done. I don't think it ever will be done. And so my question in return is, and this is just a rhetorical question, it's not aimed at anybody, but it's like, what group of people in history do not explore, discuss, learn, evaluate, and commemorate their history on an ongoing basis? Now, I mean, one could argue, okay, we don't need a month or a week. We need to be doing this, all day, every day, or any chance we get. But the question is, like, what group of people don't uh, commemorate their history or study their history on an ongoing basis? And and this is more like a statement. There always are going to be rituals, festivals, and religious ceremonies that surround a people's history, where they can come together and engage in focal practices, or just basic ceremonies, like I said before, and discuss their futurity. Like, and contemplate, where are we going? What are we doing wrong? So it's a time of celebration for progress that has been made. It's a reevaluation of where we're not being as progressive as we could be, and what we need to do collectively to get back on track. So I mean, in terms of like saying that, it's culminated, it's reached this, endpoint. I just don't see that as a practical uh, way to view Black history at all. I think there's always going to be a need to reflect and to evaluate Black history. So uh, that's just my take on it.
Thank you for your take. Thank you for your take, and you added some more aspects to it with regard to the project itself, beginning with the Negro History Week, right? And that it's not just about, shall we say, calling into attention the contributions, but there's a bigger socio-political project going on there. And you did mention the celebration of progress. And to that, I will now ask BGS. And I know you're just coming in, I don't know how much of the conversation you've heard already. But the idea has to do with the acknowledgement of progress. And I know that generally speaking, I'm couching this within the general idea of progress. And it tends to be, especially amongst progressives, even though this is not about them, I'm just using them as an example, it tends to be a tendency not to acknowledge progress because it's almost like shooting yourself in the foot. You're killing your reason for being if you acknowledge progress. That is why I'm asking the question, because I know it's provocative. So, BGS, with regards to the ends towards which Black History Month was targeted, has there been some progress? Has Black History Month done some work, if you will?
Oh, of course, because you wouldn't be having this argument about critical race theory if it wasn't for Black history. Black History
Mm.
Month, Black History, Negro History Week, and then Jet and Ebony magazine that used to post this, Black history and acknowledge the facts of Black history for years and years and years. It became Black History Month in the '60s, um, and now to the point where critical race theory is wants Black history integrated into American history, which it should have been all along. So there is progress. There's always progress. And progressives always look to the future. That's what they're supposed to do. Okay, is for us people to actually look at what has already been done. Okay, the end point is not there yet because we're still fighting over it. We're still fighting over Black history, all of it. The truth of it being taught in schools, been taught just like we learn um, American history started in kindergarten. Okay, Black history and the Negro people, which is, we can call us FBA or ADOS. Our actual name is actually Negro. Okay, that's the name we were given. For 200 years before all this stuff started, right? We're actually Negroes. Negro History Week is the actual term because that is our actual ideology in this country. That's what all the all the um, all the books and all the lineage and everything was actually written on. Okay, we try to adopt something else. When people ask what is ADOS, what's FBA, we're Negroes. Okay, we don't like the name, but that's what we are. And Negro history has to be integrated because Negro history is American history. We built this freaking country, right? We cleared the land. We made the South. The South is a swamp. Okay, we dug the canals. We drained the land. We chopped down the trees. We killed the animals. Okay, those were black people. Those were Negroes because we're the only people that could do it. All the Native Americans and the white people died when they tried to do that stuff. America would not be this country without Negroes. Okay, we built America, with our bodies. So we are integrated into this history. 70% of the GDP in America came out of the South, the swamp. Okay, on the backs of Negroes. Capitalism, as we know it, is built on the backs of Negroes. It's actually the 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 plantation model was actually exported throughout the whole world. Still goes on in China, right? Where sometimes you see these nets to keep the workers in China from leaping out of the buildings into their deaths. Okay, the 996 model that's formulated that comes from the plantation. Okay, all of white supremacy, all of capitalism is built on the back of Negro people. We are American history, point blank. Period. The thing is, until we get integrated and get our just due in American history, Negro History Month will always be necessary. It won't end until we actually get that into that endpoint. Okay, which is the truth. If it was a lie, it'd be different. The thing is, it's the truth. So that's what I feel about it.
Thank you very much, BGS. Go ahead and shout out the super chat, Doctor Thunder, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Gregory Scotland, thank you very much for the $4.99. And how many black people, both domestic or foreign, know that Carter G. Woodson began the current movement of black history?
I know. Nobody
You're
else
supposed you're
knows. I
supposed to
know.
know. You're supposed to know.
Well, first of all, he's one of my frat brothers, Omega Psi Phi. Rude to the Qs out there, if you may be out there. But I mean, ultimately, let me just interject really quickly. So, I mean, when you read, Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, he basically says this: look, the American educational system is really actually designed to make black folks feel like they're second class citizens, that they're inferior. Okay, that they have a backwards culture, or that there's something wrong with them morally or ontologically, like there's something built into and encoded into who they are that makes them inferior. And so, Carter G. Woodson said, well, what we have to do is we have to develop the recruitment and the education, of African American educators, such that they can basically fill in the gaps and rewrite and invert what America is trying to do when it comes to the self-esteem and the knowledge base of young African American children, right? And then he also says a lot of times what white folks will do is they'll distort history. They'll deliberately erase significant features or functions of black history in order to prop themselves up, right? And so he says, look, this is a corrective measure. And if we leave, American history and white folks to their own devices, they'll tell any kind of story, okay? So we need to correct them when they err and when they, apply methodologies which basically deprecate us as a whole. And, I just remember the quote he says.
Story at all.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna let you speak. But the last quote, it's a quote that Carter G. Woodson made. He said, "Look, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about what he's doing or his actions." I'm kind of surmising. You can determine what he thinks. You don't have to worry about what he's going to do. If you make a man believe he's inferior, you don't have to compel him to seek an inferior status. He'll do so without being told. And if you make him believe that he's an outcast, you won't have to tell him to go in the back door. He will make a back door to go in because the very nature of this man will make him do so. It'll make him build a back door. So, let's face it, man. In the black community, there's a divide. I mean, there's a divide between working class black folks, or poor black folks, or ghetto poor black folks, and members of the black intelligentsia or the black middle class. So a lot of times, what ends up happening is we end up doing white man's work for him by basically asserting that there's something ontologically wrong with ourselves, or that there's something backward about ourselves. Now, the circumstances might be backward, and we might have some work to do, but this whole idea that we're ontologically, meaning that the very nature of our being is such that there's something malevolent and ignorant and something deficient about us. That has to be changed. And so I'm an advocate of the Woodsonian point of view. So I'm going to retreat for a minute and just see what
And
y'all
let me
got to say.
just and let me just add that and most people are not even aware of this. Dr. J and GG and BGS might be, but there's an association that Carter G. Woodson founded, and it's the association today is called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was founded in 1915. All right, so this is an organization that's been around for over 100 years, and still alive and well. And it was founded with the express purpose of Black Americans first. Well, it started with the historians, the intellectuals, or what have you, but then it included just regular Black people to be contributors to the production of Black history and the maintenance in terms of storytelling, narration of the story of Black people. And ASLA is an organization that has been very strong, and it understands the realities, the political realities that black knowledge production has faced in terms of history and memory and all that kind of stuff. And it's driven with the premise that we cannot, as Black people, leave it in the hands of the ruling class, the mainstream decision makers, to tell the stories of Black people, or to keep the narrative of Black people alive. Okay. And so when we talk about Black history in many respects, like today, we're talking about public schools, or you might be talking about, colleges and universities, what have you, institutions that Black people have limited control over. But the ideology behind this association is one of such that Black people cannot and should not rely exclusively on external mechanisms, those things external to themselves, to tell the story of Black people. And also, Woodson, he is a part of a time that also included other voices, or at least emerging voices from emerging generations who contributed to the writing and production of Black history. People like John Hope Franklin, people like John Henry Clark, a whole bunch of historians, George Jackson. There's a whole bunch of voices, especially from the mid to late 20th century, that people don't talk about. J.A. Rogers, who he was a Caribbean, but he was a Caribbean who lived here in the United States, who was very invested in the story of Black people and what have you. Chancellor Williams. There's a whole bunch of people, you know what I mean? And they were driven by this idea of kind of intellectual independence. And that's something that has to be, I think, preserved and what have you. And that, the merits of Black history is not exclusively determined by, the bureaucratic structures that are not controlled by Black people.
Yeah, Dr. Thunder, you might want to chime in on this while you go ahead tweaking with the colors and all that stuff that you just can't help but do, Dr. Thunder. But Now, a lot has been said already on it, include adding the different aspects, the different facets. BGS mentioned that, hey, of course, progressives always looking to the future. Um, Now you understand the reason why I'm asking the question, which is to acknowledge the there's something unnatural about acknowledging progress in a project that is never ending, if you will, and a project that evolves with the time, and a project whereby the dominant society also has a say and evolves its tactics, right, that you're fighting against, right? But I want to ask for that acknowledgement of progress. So we go back to the provocative version of the question: has Black History Month run its course, Dr. Thunder? Just your thoughts on it.
Uh, so I'm one that uh, I've gone through some different evolutions of my position on or my evaluation of the validity of or whatever of Black History Month. I've been everywhere from the Morgan Freeman approach all the way to um, sort of reluctantly, okay, I don't like the idea of sort of creating these, using the shortest month in the year to somehow house the profundity of Black history. Um, to like, hey, well, if this is all we have, okay, we got something, let's do something with it. And so even earlier this week, I did a concert, it was a Black History program, and we covered Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, Joe Henderson, and Cannonball Adderley. Uh, addressing the of the modern jazz saxophone, the heaviest hitters, right, and and unapologetically, disproportionately, when we talk about jazz, when we talk about black music, black men have been at the forefront of what has driven that thing. I think that it's easy to start to obscure the necessity, the importance of black men in this history. You turn on TV, you turn on BET or something, and you'd be led to believe that it was only black women that had made significant strides, uh, and that is just not true. It is just patently false. Um, so, do I think that we've made enough progress to say, hey, this is done? Of course not. I think that there's a lot to do. Even if you consider things like the posturing of white students, even PWIs. I work at a big PWI, and when you highlight black men, the significance of black men, historically significant black men, you'll actually even have some of these white kids, uh, you know, claim that there's some sort of racial issue. Isn't that racism? Why are we doing this? So it seems that we're barely even started along this, down the road with this. And the last thing I was going to say on this is uh, the well, you know what? I'll pause there because I don't want to change the topic.
Can
So
I
I'll
add
pause
something?
there. Go ahead.
Can I add something? Well, you said something that I just wanted to mention real quick. I noticed because I teach at a predominantly Hispanic institution at this point, but I've mostly been at predominantly white institutions. And one of the things I noticed is there's been this kind of casual regressing of what racism is. And it's really gotten to the point where any focus on a given group or shift from a focus from another group is somehow considered racism. Any type of discriminatory statement or behavior is whittled down to racism, especially with the populations you mentioned. And I hear that a lot. And so one of the things I have to do in my course is actually differentiate between discrimination between, say, academic focus and racism. And one of the things I qualify for my students is that, especially between discrimination and racism, if there's not the force of institutional will, you might be having a conversation about discrimination. But so in other words, what I hear is, two people in a parking lot throwing racial slurs at each other somehow becomes on par with redlining because it's all just racism. And so I have to qualify. There's a significant difference between me throwing a term, even an incendiary racial term at somebody versus having the capacity to prevent you from employment, having the capacity to make sure a whole demographic of your community can't get into college, even as early as elementary school, being shifted out of a college track. Like we have to actually have conversations because there seems to be an ongoing attempt to redefine what Black folk in particular have grappled against in the most casual and imprecise terms. And so I just wanted to kind of add that because of what you kind of added on to that a second ago. I think it's dangerous. And I think it's one of the reasons that we have to be outspoken about it. Is if you let people with these questionable motivations redefine the Black experience and the terms that we've laid on the table in terms of what we've experienced, I don't trust their motivations for it. And I tend to find those motivations have their own political direction.
And
Yeah, and let me just add.
if I can add this real quick. So first of all, let me acknowledge the super chatter. Dar with the $5 super chat. Oh snap! All-star team. Salute, all-star team, indeed. I just wanted to say something about this revisionist sort of thing that Gigi was mentioning. So when we talk about the significant players, and I was just talking about Black saxophonists that have been of critical importance. One in particular, Charlie Parker, music would just totally not sound the way that it does. Almost nothing in any form of fashion of music, I'm talking even modern classical music, it all would be totally different. I can make a serious argument to the effect that Charlie Parker may be the most important figure in the history of music, especially modern music. So we're talking about a significant figure, but with the way that jazz is taught in these institutions now, and with the lack of representation of Black folks and Black teachers in particular, Black professors, but then also the students that are being recruited and the sort of lack of quote unquote diversity or of a certain demographic, Black men in particular, I'm talking about. I think it would be very easy for folks that don't know a lot about the music when we bring up figures like Charlie Parker for them to think that he's a white guy. That's a real danger. And we don't, that seems like so ridiculous even to say, but I think that's where we actually are. That's where we actually are because of such a lack of representation. And the people that are performing the music on the regular don't look like us. The people that are teaching the music don't look like us. So it would be pretty easy for the students, especially with this whole, colorblind, don't mention race. You can't focus on this or else you're racist. All of this kind of stuff. We're really in a dangerous situation. So I just want to mention that. Go ahead, Dr. Neal.
Yeah, and what I want to say, and this is the reason why you would have some, like myself, who questions the idea of progress and progressivism, what have you. And I do this in my own work at a different level and what have you, because progress is manufactured, progress is engineered. You have to ask yourself, who is the puppet master of progress? And who is defining what progress is, and that sort of thing. And it's not to say that change has not taken place. Obviously, it's change. And I think there needs to be a distinction to be made between progress versus change. We could talk about change at one level and progress as something else, okay? but we tend to elevate progress over change. And so, in light of what Dr. Johnson has said and what Dr. Thunder has said, yeah, we have to question these notions, because there have been serious reductions in terms of how we understand the existence of Black people, Black Americans in particular, in the United States, and how do we understand this whole, even the whole idea of race. And I can say personally, where I have been in places where the conversation about so-called race has gone, in places that had absolutely nothing to do with Black people. Okay, you can get into a conversation at a university in a so-called multicultural context, and someone lifts up the whole idea of race, and before you know it, you're talking about Palestinians, you're talking about Armenians, you're talking about Jews, you're talking about a
Women.
whole bunch of people. You're talking about, you're talking about all these different things, and there's no specificity when it comes down to the U.S. context. So race becomes everything to everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that race, cannot be read from a global standpoint, which it can and it should and what have you. But when you but when you're in a setting where the starting point is a particular demographic of people, let's say Black people in the United States, Black Americans, what some call ADOS today, or some will call Foundation, or whatever you want to call us. Negroes, I like the BGSs because I grew up with the Negro. I grew up with the Negro, and I defend the word Negro, and I've had to help white professors defend the word Negro in my institution, okay, because they've had Black students who pushed back against them about the word Negro in literature, and I said, you tell them to, shut up. You just explain to them that that's not a derogatory term. Anyway, but the point is that we've dealt with a lot of reductionism, and that is very dangerous to how we understand us. You understand? And so, and here's the thing. I'll give you another thing. So with critical race theory, critical race theory now, because of intersectionality, it has been married to transgenderism. It's been married to LGBTQ politics. It's been married to so many other things that have nothing to do directly with the direct experience of Black people, that it has
Right.
diluted.
Right.
It has diluted the growth, the genealogy, the growth and the intentionality, everything that created critical race theory. So essentially, critical race theory is being whitewashed right before our eyes. It's being whitewashed. It's being trivialized. And it's happening in relationship to these other political projects, okay? And these other political projects right now, particularly with the conservatives, are being used to dismantle critical race theory, or to minimize it, or to get rid of it altogether, particularly from well, it's not, I mean, I apply this, to move the conversation, to move it outside the conversation, to eliminate it from any type of public conversation. I'll put it like that, apart from the schools, but any type of public conversation.
So can I say something
So
real
that's
quick?
that's the
Okay,
problem with that's the problem with the idea of progress.
so let me just say this. So like I want to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Neal was saying, but like I make a differentiation between tactical change, which is a kind of mitigative, superficial change, and like paradigmatic or substantive change. Now so there's a difference between those, and you know as far as I'm concerned, like just knowing the history of Black studies programs, how they got formed in the United States. I think one of the first ones was San Francisco State in California in the late 60s, I think 68, between 68 and 69. And then other
Right.
schools throughout the country began to pick up on it. But these Black studies programs were started by radical Black nationalists, okay, young people, Okay, people who are dedicated to black nationalism. Now, of course, today a lot of people think that black nationalism is passe and it's regressive as opposed to progressive. I tend to think the exact opposite is the case. But I mean, eventually, the very programs that were started by these radical young black people, they got taken over by more safe and racially accommodationist black folks, okay, or black folks that the white people find safe and comfortable. Let's just be honest about this. White people run the university system, okay, and after time, they're going to hire people who have the value systems that they have, and that who make them comfortable. And it's no strange secret that like the biggest demographic at the university right now is white women. Okay, they've virtually taken over the university system. So it's no strange secret as to why feminism is now wedded or married to African American studies. I mean, because it's a natural. I hate to use this word, but quote unquote, it's a natural progression because of the people who control the hiring at the university systems. Okay, so like I don't even know if you know what it takes to get hired at a university, but it is a long and arduous process. Okay, and you got to go through so many layers just to get admitted for an interview, and then even after the interview, you got to meet so many different people. You got to meet faculty, students. You got to meet the dean of the college that you're applying for, the head of the department that you're applying for. In some instances, you might have to meet the provost or even the university president, and you gotta fit in with these people. So you gotta have the kind of soft skills that make these kind of people comfortable. And when the demographics of the university changes and the mindset of the faculty changes, then the people they hire, they're going to change. So what started off as something radical has now been attenuated and weakened to the point where it doesn't have the same kind of teeth, and it's not moving in the same kind of trajectory, which it started off with. But I'm going to pull back for a minute.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a question specifically about the Black studies, if you will, and Ron DeSantis and all that kind of stuff, right? But Dr. Tierson Johnson, I have a personal question here for you. It's a personal question with regards to the study of history. Okay, now I'm going to create a dichotomy here. And if on the one hand you have what I will call the esteem bucket, whereby you're studying history, you're celebrating things, achievements, let's say, you're celebrating achievements. It is meant to ennoble the people, it is meant to give them esteem, and it's meant to be a celebration. So there's that aspect of the study of history. And then there's the other aspect of study of history, which is, shall we say, is more scientific. It's looking at it empirically to build a model, to understand patterns, and then that will guide action. Now, the personal aspect here is, for you, how do you weigh these two? Obviously, there's both in everyone, right? And even if it's 50-50, how do you weigh them? Where do you start, right? So you have the esteem aspect, and then you have the more perhaps tactical aspect, or let's just call it model building aspect, whereby you say, well, to what degree can I learn about social, political, economic changes and the manner in which they occur, such that it can guide my action? Dr. Tierson Johnson.
Well, I think my motivation is excuse me. My motivation has been to do both. I mean, you mentioned both, and I say this for a reason, because again, as a teacher and looking at the quality and state of the Black students I run across, what you're calling esteem, I get that that's the kind of safe term that people use, but for me, it's been really a pushback against socialized dehumanization. I mean, what our kids, what our community has actually been, what we've been conditioned on, because I'm Generation X. I grew up in the time period where Black History Month was not treated as Black History Month, especially in the public school system. It was really Black History Day. And that day, we read Martin Luther King. We read a paragraph of his I Had a Dream speech. I Have a Dream speech. That was it, right? So when you start to factor in the rise of the prison industrial complex, especially in the 1970s and onward, and many other things I can add to that, what we ended up with was a pretty serious dose of dehumanization. And that doesn't even deal with the media, doesn't even deal with the economics that contributed to that notion and downplay, say men in the family poverty rates, homelessness rates, so on and so forth. That being said, when we talk about what you're referring to as this esteem issue, I see it as necessary. as far as an attempt to rescue people who've not been allowed to be human on the public stage and not to see themselves as human in many respects as well, right? But at the same time, when you talk about the other aspect of history that has to do with recognizing patterns and whatnot, I address that, especially in an attempt to improve the quality of Black life. So that being said, I think it's irresponsible not to focus on history from at least those two vantage points because of the necessity of rescuing us from dehumanization, but at the same time the implicit need to address and understand patterns so that we can better capitalize off of them to improve the quality of life in the community in and of itself. And I think that I can't separate the two in that respect because of the need on both fronts. But I hope that answers the
Very
question.
well put.
Here, let me
Very well
shout
put.
out
Yeah, no, but
the
you answered it perfectly. Go ahead, Dr. Thunder.
yeah, let me mention the super chatter Hakeem with the $5 super chat. Shout out to the esteemed panel. Shout out to you, sir.
All right. So you put it perfectly. So it's not just esteem to be put lightly. However, it's a systematic pushback against dehumanization, and that raises up the level of importance of it. And it's even then tied to the other aspect of, okay, well, if I'm going to study history, also as to recognize patterns, build a model to guide my actions today. How do I act if I can't even see myself as a human being, right? BGS, with regards to, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you have some ready-made answers here to this particular question. With regards to the half of history that has to do with models of socioeconomic change, what models have we learned from Black history with regards to perhaps the changes that we would like to see? We've talked about so far, and by we I mean the panel, right? Let's talk about certain changes that they would like to see, certain new tactics, and certain new fronts that are opening up in the war. Uh, Green Gorilla talked about paradigmatic change versus tactical change. So
Mm-hmm.
there is the notion of the changes that that have to happen. What models
Mm-hmm.
from history can we learn as to how these changes come about? What are the points of action that we can have, and these kinds of things? What models from history can be a guide for today's action?
Well, number one, basically, and I'm a structural realist. Okay, I'm from that camp, right? So my first um, my first identifier, my first model is from the environment. How does the environment change? Uh, as far as what's on the ground, where you are, what's on the ground, what tools that you're using will change the environment, right? We're here is because okay, the reason that we're here and this whole experiment we call white supremacy is happening is because uh, a group of conquistadors went to what we call southern Mexico and found a whole mountain of silver. And silver was the coin of the realm at the time, right? Chinese, who has the biggest GDP on the planet, only accepted silver for their goods. So they found this big ass mountain of silver, and all of a sudden Europe became rich overnight. Okay, that affected the whole world and started this big rush to actually acquire Europe to acquire all kind of goods, goods and people and resources around the world. It funded this whole thing. So that changed the environment. Okay, the Industrial Revolution was actually modeled after the slave plantations, changed the environment. Machines came, changed the whole environment, changed the way the world works. Okay, now we got the digital revolution. Okay, so so we're moving from the uh, the capitalism model, which started in the 16th century, to the uh, social contract model, which started with when the machines came in the Industrial Revolution, that started this whole thing called rights and liberalism and voting and feminism and all this kind of stuff that we see now. Okay, moving into a technocratic age, and we have to model our tactics, okay, when the paradigm changes, the environment changes the paradigm. We don't. How you maneuver inside the paradigm or inside the environment are the tactics, okay? So we have to adjust what we think, what we do, and how we go about things to actually adapt to this environment. As you're an engineer, okay, you know how different tools can actually change a paradigm. We saw that with the internet. We saw that with the iPhone. We saw that with with the global network when they lay all these fiber lines all the way around the world and have instantaneous uh, uh, information and instantaneous communications around the world, how that changes things, right? Okay, how it changes who actually leads the world. Okay, China's rising. White supremacy, as we know, probably will not be here in the next 40 years. Okay, it's gonna be gone. What's next, and how do we adapt to it? Which is why
Hmm.
white people are trying to be inclusive now. That's part of it because they see what's happening from the top down. They see what's happening. That's like when we're having this big angst uh, about white supremacy and white people and what's racism and what's feminism and who's going to get what. This is a social contract going crazy because now we're at this nexus that we were like 200 years ago, and we have to figure this stuff out.
Hmm.
So
Very well
so the
put. So,
go ahead,
yeah,
go ahead.
sorry, go.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I believe you used the term structural realist. Okay. Um, materialist dialectic comes into mind as well. In other words, the conditions on the ground being what move, quote unquote, what we call history, right? You
What did Feynman say? What did Feynman say? It doesn't matter how good your mathematics is. It doesn't matter how good the experiment is. It doesn't matter how much of uh, how good your theory is. If it doesn't match up with the experiment, the results of the experiments is wrong. Okay, that is
know,
fundamentally a structural realist. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what happens on the ground, what the result is the right thing. Okay, no matter how
very
good
well
your
put.
experiment is.
And you're again to remind ourselves of the question being, what models can we learn from history? And I believe BGS has said, hey, look, what we need to learn is what the dominant material conditions are. And these are economic and technological. And technology is not just, tools and means of doing more with less, but technology can also be social constructs, right? A
Hmm.
form of contracts and a form of nation states and so on and so forth. So, what is the dominant geopolitical environment that we're in? That's something we should learn from history, and that's what we need to adapt to and maneuver in. If we're in a
And,
technological phase, and we're just,
how these
with global.
cycles how
Go
these
ahead.
cycles actually form. Okay, the human beings only work in cycles. Okay, they do the same thing over again. They just do it differently according to the conditions that they're in. Right. So
Mhm.
these models will actually repeat. And how do they repeat? And how can you adapt those repeated models into where you are right now? And that's what we have to learn from history, especially black folks. The reason that the civil rights actually happened, right, is two things, right? They no longer needed you on the farm as serf and peasants to make money anymore. They had to integrate you, okay? That's number one. And number two, the paradigm of instant communications called television that went around the world. That actually uh, caused the civil rights movement to happen and actually to succeed. If you go back and look at the movie Selma, Martin Luther King played for the TV cameras. Okay, he took advantage and put social pressure on the United States to make changes because of the environment that they're in, the electronic environment they're in. Okay, we have to do the same thing. The manosphere, the black manosphere itself, right? We're taking advantage of social media and the instant communications around the world to actually affect change and actually take advantage of the environment and the situations that we're in. Okay, Kevin Samuels would not have risen without social media. Okay,
Mm.
you couldn't have had that. You couldn't have had him pierce the veil without social media and the effects that it has. And we used it. Okay, we rode the wave, and that's the whole thing about the victors in any form of history or any form of historical movement and environment are the people that ride the wave the best. And I'll park it
Mhm.
right there.
Yeah. Thank you
Here,
very much. And
And that
Dr.
was
Thunder,
let me
send
acknowledge the
Dr. Thunder
super chatter real
super chat
quick.
real quick.
Yeah, Mr. Tolbert with the $10 super chat. Salute to the panel. Salute indeed. Yes.
So I
yeah,
believe, was that
and
Ronald Neal?
yeah, yeah. And what I was going to say is, and I agree with what BGS um, has said, and there's another way of saying he's a pragmatist. Um, but here's the thing. Yeah, I mean, we have a history where we've ridden waves before. You know what I mean? I mean, and I tend to point to people like Booker T. Washington in terms of industrialism, someone who was very, very derided by so-called, the so-called progressives of his time, who saw the need for black people to get in line with the rising industrial order of his time, and he saw things happening, particularly in the South, that black elites, particularly outside the South, like W.E.B. Du Bois, didn't see. Okay, in terms of where the economy was going. Okay, and there are other figures who succeeded him in everything. And I would say also, to add to what BGS said, the other factor in terms of civil rights was the Cold War. So geopolitical events in terms of what's happening between the U.S. and other nations also impacts the wave as we, navigate it and everything. And we, and what history basically says is that we have not, as black people, black men in particular, and black people in general, black men and women, black children, black families, black communities, what have you, we have not been passive actors. Okay. So when the economy of the South began to change, what did we do? A lot of us got up, we left, and we moved out the South. Okay. We moved to the West. We moved from Louisiana to Texas. We moved from, Georgia, North Carolina to Pennsylvania and New York. We moved from Mississippi and to St. Louis and to Illinois and to Indiana. As the times change, and the whole history of black migration is all about black people, quote unquote, adapting. And rising, to the demand to change with the times. And so, yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about, quote unquote, the study of Black history, because we get to see that, and the unfortunate thing about the moment that we're in now is that we're constantly bombarded with these efforts to erase those efforts. And we are bombarded with the demand that we do not take it seriously. And what I mean by that is that Black history, I mean, the historical experience of Black people is simply not respected. It is not valued across society, and that includes Black people. And we see even on social media, even we mentioned Kevin Samuels, and Kevin Samuels, tried to help the women he talked to understand that there was a distinction between the world that Black people lived in prior to 1970 and the world that Black people, were birthed into after 1970. Okay, and that there were different techniques, different understandings of the world, and different ways of organizing life that are instructive. They were not perfect. They were not perfect. Okay, but they were instructive if we're going to think about going into the future. You know, but what did we see? We saw a complete disparaging of all of that. We saw a complete rejection of all of that. Black women. Here's the thing about, and we've talked about this on Gigi's page and with Dr. Johnson and BGS and everything like this. There is a spirit of anti-history, or there is what is called, what we call presentism, that the only thing that matters is in
Hmm.
front of us. The only thing that happens is the now. That's presentism. Feminism is driven by presentism. LGBTQ politics is driven by presentism. All right. That's why the transgenders, they hate you talking about biology, evolution, and millions of years, and what human beings have been doing for millions of years. Okay, because they think that the present is the only thing that matters, and that the present is superior than anything that came before it. Okay, and so unfortunately, Black people, and we see it in popular culture, Black people have a presentist orientation. Lots of white people have a presentist orientation, and and when you couple that with anti-blackness, the utter hatred of black people, it just makes it a hard time talking about the historical experience of black people in the U.S.
Can I piggyback on
So,
that?
no, yeah, for sure. I'm gonna go to you right on and on this same topic, just keeping the listeners here still in focus with regards to what we're talking about here, the models that we can learn from history, and we're in this kind of a materialist, Marxist in the real way, Marxist insofar as has to do with material changes which have an internal logic of their own, being the primary movers of history, and you ride those waves and you move along those patterns, and now economically the opening up of the globe with regards to the spreading of technology, which is what globalization is. Okay, the technological event is you have zero computers and then you make one computer. That's the one first computer. A globalization event is you spread that computer to millions and millions of people, and with that comes billions and billions of dollars, right? So you make technology and then you spread technology, and that has an internal logic of itself. Just to add to one of these particular patterns that BGS starts off us off with, and this is a great opportunity with regards to any group that's going to progress at all, or any individual, to take advantage of this particular trend, right? Which does move history. Green Gorilla, you can add to this, but I also want you to perhaps bring in, if you will, the other views of history, which have to do with, and these are just all just perspectives. It all happens at the same time. You have these kinds of material events, but also you have people, right? Which would be like the great man view of history. It happened because of Napoleon. It happened because of Martin Luther King. It happened because of Genghis Khan, that kind of a thing. And then somebody else will tell you, no, it was because of the famine and the development of some technology, right? So we've been talking about the material aspects. You can react to that, add on top of that, but also you may want to bring in what some of the lessons and the learnings from the past that has to do with people, individuals taking action. And then perhaps we'll go back to Dr. Tiersan Johnson and maybe we'll talk about the ideas aspect, because he brought up the fact that certain ideas, him and also Dr. Ron Neal, ideas being taken and bastardized, and how does this help with the history? But anyways, go ahead, Green Gorilla.
Well, first of all, the whole idea, the concept of material dialectics is a Marxian concept. But I mean, of course, the whole concept of dialectics that Marx developed is borrowed from a German philosopher
Hegel.
by the name of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Okay, and Hegel basically, he basically says that history progresses through, historical dialectics, and namely that there are either individuals or events or ideas that pop up that ineluctably move history to different points and to where there's going to be paradigm shifts or changes. But overall, those changes are going to be for the better. And it's based upon his idealistic concept, or his philosophy, namely that throughout history, the Geist or the spirit is trying to understand itself and unfold itself and perfect itself. And so, I have my issues with it because, of course, he believes that white people or Germanic people are the ones who are the spirit of the Geist, or whatever the case may be. They are emblematic of what Geist all is. And so history is unfolding and developing by them, and their history is the history that is leading to the perfection and the ultimate freedom of the spirit itself, which I think is a bunch of nonsense. But we can look back on it. Is Napoleon a historical figure that pushed history? The progress of history forward? Yeah, I guess maybe. But in relation to who and what group of people, right? I can point to Dessalines or to Saint L'Ouverture and say the same thing, or MLK. Is it JFK? Is it J. Edgar Hoover? It all depends on what side of history you're looking at and what you think is progress and what you think is regress.
Or LG,
you get what I'm saying?
LBJ.
Right, LBJ. So history, as far as I'm concerned, there progressives tend to think that history is moving ineluctably I call them meliorists because things are getting better and better and better and better. I mean, we're always just incrementally moving forward, and like I just don't believe that history teaches us that this is like the truth. If you want to really be objective, and real, as you say, quote unquote, I just don't think that history is bears out that things move in a linear fashion towards inescapable improvement. I just think that that's false. All you got to do is look at the fall of the Roman Empire and how it led to the Dark Ages for centuries. Okay, Egypt. I was just talking to Dr. Thunder ahead of time about how the world was driven into a dark age even before the fall of Rome. Well, not the fall of Rome, but even before, like the Middle Ages, one could argue probably was brought about by, Roman Catholicism sacking of the Library of Alexandria. So, I mean, I just don't believe that history is just this linear progression and things are just getting better and better and better. I think that's a false narrative. That's just my opinion. I mean, we could beg to differ. And then also, technology. I love technology. It can be used for things that are great. But technology, on the other hand, and I had a conversation about this on my show with some guys not too long ago, but everybody thinks that technology is just so great. Like, I love technology. I mean, what would I do without my telephone? What would I do without my computer? What would I do without my access, to the vast array of knowledge that you get on the internet? But I mean, at the same time, there's something that you have to pay for all of this technological progress. I mean, like it's separating people from each other, even though it's connecting them together in virtual ways. It's separating us from each other in realistic ways, right? So we're not coming together like we used to anymore. Like, I mean, even to listen to music, right? We used to go to concerts to listen to the music. Now we got the Walkmans.
Hey, Green
Then went from the
Gorilla,
Walkmans. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could throw this in there, and you can tell me what you think of this. This is related. Seems to be related to what you're talking about. We're talking about Black History Month. The oh my goodness, it just jumped out of my head. The Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance. So, of course, you had, creativity, brilliance, artistic virtuosity. But it's always been my, well, not always, but I usually say that without the boom in the economy, there is no Harlem Renaissance. What do you think of that? Do you think I'm
no, I don't think you're tripping when you say that. I mean, the confluence of people, coming together, the economic boom, all of these people from different places, moving into this cosmopolitan area, New York. Of course, you're going to get like, the development of artistic genius the way you haven't before, because you got this confluence of, great artists who are together in close proximity, and they're they're influencing each other, whether it's literature, whether it's music. Yeah, I get it, okay, but all I can say is progress and technology. I just don't think that technology in and of itself brings about the kind of progress that people think that they think that it will. Okay, especially if it's misused and it disconnects people from each other. That's where I was kind of getting at. I don't know if I was being too long-winded, but I do think that there are. Go ahead.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you this. Dr. Thunder has actually one aspect of this, and then let me ask you another aspect, which is, well, it's one thing to just believe that of it in and of itself, technology will lead somewhere. It's like, well, that will be foolhardy, right? I mean, it's a tool, right? It does not lead inevitably somewhere. However, if we do agree that material conditions do exist, they have an internal logic of their own, and you ride them. You either get on the train or you get run over by the train, that kind of a thing. What do you think about what I said about taking advantage of the spreading of technology, right? Hey, I'm going to go over to Africa and create these cubic satellites that are cheap and put them up there and create the next $1 trillion company, solve X, Y, Z, many, many, many problems that have to do with technology, right? Not because you believe technology is great, but because you're going to ride that wave, and you're a black man, and you're gonna hire black people, whatever. There can be a social aspect to that as well. But what is your thoughts about, hey, I'm going to locate this wave. It's called globalization, which has to do with the spreading of technology. I'm going to take advantage of it economically.
Yeah, you're asking Dr. Thunder this, or you're asking me this?
No, yeah, I'm asking you, Green Room. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so yeah, man, look, I do believe that we should take advantage of any opportunities that we have, in order to ameliorate our condition, whether it be through technology, culture, or otherwise. The only thing I'm mindful of is this, and I want people to be aware of is this, that yeah, technology is the great democratizer. Okay, like in terms of influence, we talked about it. BGS talked about it. I think that Dr. Thunder just mentioned it, talked about how different events lead to the development of culture and so on and so forth. The only reason I'm cautious about technology is because I'm aware of what like Western philosophers are saying about technology and the havoc it wreaks upon the planet and the interruptions that it causes for people in relation to their social interaction. That's the only thing I'm worried about. But should we be taking advantage of technology and using it to ameliorate our political condition? Most assuredly. Our economic condition, especially if it means throwing off the yoke of colonizers and interlopers, like whether it's the Chinese in Africa, or whether it's the French, the English in Africa, or whether it's Americans here in the United States. I mean, we need to be developing strategies as best we can, utilizing whatever we can in order to improve our condition and to develop some sort of self-reliance and autonomy. Of course, I think so. But we should also be alert to, the caveats related to, technology, and to not get so reliant on it to the point where we lose our humanity. That's the only thing I'm worried about. But yeah.
100%. So, Dr. Thunder, we got another super chat here for 99. Okay, he says the conversation panel is Black history itself. You have it up there. You want to
Yep,
read the
I
name.
do. Yes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Donnie Mack. Mr. Donnie Mack. So, Dr. T. Hassan Johnson. Okay, now with regards to the at least three aspects from which history can be viewed, which would be, hey, this material substrate, which has a logic of its own and it moves things, and you get on the train or the train rides you over, right? And then there's this other aspect of the great man that does stuff, right? It's Martin Luther King that did it, and so on and so forth. And then there's another aspect which shout out to Green Gorilla, also kind of dovetails with what Hegel was about, which was about the ideas. So, this evolution of mind, that the spirit just, the ideas have a inherent logic of their own as they develop. You mentioned some of the ideas that are taken and are belittled, bastardized, misunderstood, mischaracterized, misapplied, if you will. How important is the reclamation of those ideas, the setting aright of that to the progress that we're talking about? Okay, one could say, hey, ideas don't matter. Just go set up a technology company using the blockchain in Africa, make billions of dollars, and that's it. Doesn't matter what the ideas are. So the question is, well, you have, I believe, said that these ideas do matter, or perhaps you can reiterate how they do matter, or that they do matter, and how they can be recaptured, if you will.
I'm at the end of the day, my view on it is, if you don't pay attention to the ideas, it's somewhat like standing in deep water and experiencing an undertow. Whether you get it or not, the ideas are going to impact you, and in many ways, the current moment, as BGS was talking about the environment earlier, the environment's influence on the current moment, whether you identify it or not, is going to play a key factor in what takes place. So you have people that are oblivious to it and choose to act as if none of these things are a factor. Then you have people that study it, profusely and respond to it. But in my view, and I think this is my pragmatism in a particular sense, it's going to affect you one way or other. and our ideas, our contributions to the moment are shaped by the dynamics of the moment, whether we're aware of it or not. So I don't think there's any escape from that, even if people claim to be attempting to do so, right? But let me know if I've missed an aspect of your question, though.
No, no, you but perhaps let's see if we can riff on it. Shout out to Dr. Thunder and the Jazz people. But there's another super chat, Dr. Thunder. We want to acknowledge that, and then
Yes,
ask
yes.
a question.
Let's see here. Yeah, so Ray Rogers showing my support, Dr. Thunder. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, so I understand you to say, like, look, these ideas will affect you. They are part of this environment that BGS talked about. The environment is not just technology, it's not just cars and internet and economic schemes and geopolitics and globalization. The environment will, or ideas will suffuse the art that you consume, the language, and the ways of thinking that all these NPCs out there will have, right? And most people are not philosophers, and even philosophers will be creatures of their time in and of itself. So they will tend to pull you down uh, into that kind of a milieu of the ideas. Um, and perhaps what you could add here is how hopeful are you? And then I also have another follow up question. Okay, but how hopeful are you with regards to the idea fight? You mentioned, and you can be granular or shall I say specific with it with regards to specific idea fights that you're having in your institution when you see people using certain things wrongly. Race has been mentioned before, for example. Do you think that no? Okay, well, I don't really think that this idea fight is really going to go anywhere. There are other movements in history too big and having too much of a momentum that it's not going to work out. What is your degree of optimism with regards to the fight in the idea arena?
Well, I don't think black folk in particular have the luxury of ignoring the idea fight entirely because at the end of the day, based on our status economically, socially, and in terms of access to, some of the major opportunities of the moment, what tends to happen on the higher level has an inevitable impact at the bottom. We're rightly known as the canaries in the mine. So we can't afford to ignore these things. But one of the things I was thinking about a moment ago when you were forming your question, I was thinking about a quote that I'd recently seen, or a kind of a observation that Juwanza Kunjufu had made. I want to say a couple decades ago, and he was talking about how the state of the black family has shifted with the economics of the times. Even the very structure of the black family was in response to the changing opportunities of in terms of types of employment from agricultural kind of work to the different types of labor over the last 50 to 60 to 70 years. And really, because the statement was made probably in the 1980s, he could only go so far with what he was saying. But what I was observing in that was the shift, the impact of technology on employment to this current moment, the kind of micro labor that people are able to access now that's global, it's mobile, it can be small. You have it where musicians can put out an album online and directly have their money come to them as opposed to being filtered through major corporations. Individual professors can teach classes. I mean, things of that nature from anywhere in the world. This kind of micro economy, it's a gig economy that we're in, has opened up so many different things. And when you look at the impact on the black family, to me, it's not a surprise when you see passport bros. But you have people. The reason I'm bringing this up is you have people online that are solely talking about passport bros because of the impact it's having on their individual lives. But even if you step back and look at the impact of the environment on, say, black family formation, it's still kind of mathematically, it still fits because what we're experiencing now couldn't have happened 30 years ago. It couldn't have happened 40 years ago. Hell, it's questionable if it could have happened 10 years ago. So the moment, in many ways, is still tied to these larger issues, these larger experiences, these larger ideas, as it were, whether you're paying attention to them or not. And that's what I meant earlier about the undertow. Whether you're aware of it or not, if you're just a YouTuber who has 200 subscribers and you just want to talk about your experience in Brazil and this has become your major thing, you can do that. But there's still a larger reality that still shapes the conversation you're having because you couldn't have that conversation 20 years ago. You see what I mean? So I'm just saying that in regard to, these kind of issues, I see a connection between all these different levels of perception. And I think there's potential to expand the conversation we're having by taking these things into account, especially in a materialist kind of pragmatic fashion, to kind of make sense of the patterns we've seen in the past, as I'm pointing out with Juwanza Kunjufu, and making sense of what the next step can be based on that, rather than just reacting to whatever's popular in the moment. But either way, they're still shaped by, what we're experiencing.
And look, can I piggyback
Indeed.
on that? So yeah, so the only thing I wanted to say was this, like I think Dr. Johnson is right about this. Like, I mean, and I think everybody on the panel is right about this when they say, there are things that are occurring in history. I mean, like let's face it, man, we're thrown into a world, and the world discloses a bunch of information to us, and we have no ability as a youngster or as youth to reject it. We absorb it, okay? But as we grow into adults, we have the opportunity to reflect upon what's actually occurring in the world and how it's having an impact on us, you know, from a superstructural point of view. Now, some people, depending upon whether or not, they're philosophers or whether, I mean, some people just don't care to think that deeply and to worry about what's going on outside in the world. But of course, this is a space that, prides itself for being red pill, quote unquote, which means that, they're able to pull back the veil of what's going on in the matrix and observe things for what they really are. Okay. And so, my viewpoint on it is, okay, yeah, so there's a lot of things happening superstructurally, but what should we be doing now? Should we be course correcting? And what's happening to our families? Is it a matter of subjective morality, or is it a matter of objective conditions? Or is it an interplay of both? Well, of course, I think it's an interplay of both. And so guys are, they're utilizing what access they have to the internet, and they're seeing other people do things and exercising their options, and they're saying, well, hey, I have those options too, right? And so I think that technology does open up a set of options that people didn't have access to, like like Dr. Johnson was saying, maybe 40, 50 years ago. But also, technology though is in and of itself has created the conditions that have exploded things that we hold dear and that we value deeply. And then the question is, well, should we be changing our value system? Now, of course, as a philosopher, I think that the technological mode of being, like from a Heideggerian perspective, is destructive. Okay, everything is just based upon productivity, efficiency. Everything is an instrument to something else. And I think that if we keep going on that down that path or down that road, I think there's not a lot good waiting for us down it. But that's all I have to say
All
about
right,
that. So
all
let me
right, all
pull it
right, all
back.
right. When you mention thrownness and Heidegger all in the same paragraph, this is
Hmm.
good stuff there, Green Gorilla.
Yeah.
But shout out to the super chat, okay, Dr. Thunder.
Yeah, Reynolds says, salute Dr. Thunder for putting on this all star panel. And let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude for being able to put together such a panel of folks that I learn from, that I listen to, voraciously. I really appreciate y'all being here for this, I think, very important conversation.
So,
Yeah. I mean,
Dr. Johnson, and then I'm sorry, BGS, you'll get a chance, unless
okay.
you wanted to say something real quick because we're about to start
I just want to
another
say
round.
something
But
real
but go
quick.
ahead and get that.
Uh, about Heidegger throwness and the technology that we're under, right? It took a, we have accepted the world that we live in now. It's comfortable right now, right? It took 100 years for us to actually adapt to that. Okay, go back and look at what happened in Northern Europe. Uh, Go back and look at Dickens, man. That was Dickens' world, where you have little kids, 1 out of 3 kids dying, right? Uh, Kids being thrown out on the street, put in swaddling homes to die, um, all that kind of stuff, right? It wasn't easy. Okay, we had to adapt. Human beings adapted to that. We'll adapt to this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Dr. Tia Johnson, Green Gorilla talked about, well, what is to be done now? What is to be done? And a quick point on that, and then I'll ask you a question. For sure, technology does increase our powers without increasing our morality, to put it kind of simply or perhaps in a quaint way. It doesn't do that. So once you have that equation and it keeps on accelerating, you can see where it might lead, right? Technology does not make you better, doesn't make you fear evil. It might even have an opposite effect. It might have a corrosive effect on your morality, right? Or your sense of morality. It might kill God, shout out to Nietzsche, right? While giving you nuclear weapons at the same time. Now, Dr. Tierson Johnson, in regards to what is to be done, you have a 17 point, I don't know if it is expanded, but if I look at your, these are 17-point plan. And this has to do with now political action. We've been talking about history, movements of history, got into the economic aspect, the material substrate, and so on. Now, political action, what is to be done? There is an identitarian overtone to your and I know it's a compendium of ideas. It may not just all be your ideas, okay? But it talks about black, talks about male. Now, in a democracy, how can one hope to build a coalition with such an identitarian bent? Perhaps it may be the case that coalition building is not the goal here, and that you have completely foregone that, and you're going to do something on a more separatist front. But that you can elaborate on that. But the contention here is an identitarian, unabashedly black, unabashedly male thing is not going to form a coalition that will get things done in a democracy. Can that be done? If that's not the movement, then what will be the movement that can be done in a separate, non-democratic coalition way, Dr. Tierson Johnson?
Well, here's the thing, and this actually goes to my channel and a lot of the work I do. I'm not actually prescribing for black men what they should do. I'm not prescribing for black men how it should be engaged. What I'm doing is I'm trying to provide first a vocabulary for us to articulate what our particular concerns were. And I say that because when I came out of graduate school, the focus as far as trying to explain things from a black male standpoint was I was told we needed to use what concepts were available. And many of those concepts were feminist, black feminist in their orientation. And I was told that we just need to use that language to explain our situation. And I found it unwieldy. I found it inflexible, and it wasn't nuanced enough. So I set out to create a vocabulary where black men themselves could articulate their concerns. I did not set out to tell black men what their concerns were. I set up the vocabulary and tried to initiate a discourse. And something similarly is happening with the 17-point black male political agenda. I actually didn't create a lot of the concepts on there. I think I may have written one. All the rest came from black men. I didn't dictate what they should be. I didn't even dictate the categories. I asked black men for ideas on the improving the quality of life of black males, and those brothers that contributed the ideas that they did. That being said, when you talk about an identitarian political approach and whether or not we're going to collaborate and form different kinds of unions, I'm not necessarily prescribing that we do or that we don't. What I'm saying is whether we decide to operate independently or whether we decide to form coalitions, I don't think either can be effective if you don't have a clear idea of what your interests are. And because I've never seen a black male super PAC, I don't know how many brothers are aware of what our specific interests are. So if we want to form, collaborations with other groups, or we're going to operate on some of these things independently, to me, I'm indifferent. I just want to make sure we at least have a place where we have an archive of the ideas that we've developed to improve our condition. And so if we can form groups that have overlapped interests, and they may not be as particular as we may like, they may, but if there are areas where we can collaborate and it looks like something tangible can be achieved, and we know clearly what we're going to get out of it and why we're doing it, hey, if we need to do it ourselves, hey, I'm kind of, in that respect, I've tried to not be too forceful in that sense, and it's very purposeful because I recognize the limitations in what I was taught, what I've studied over the years, what I've produced. And so in that, I don't think I personally don't think it's the best approach for me to just come out and say these are all the things that need to happen and they need to happen this way. I much more wanted to have a dialogue with brothers that come from all kinds of walks of life. And this I have to say, is one of the things that gives me, a lot of hope as far as the manosphere. And that's mainly because at its base, you see a collective of men coming from around, and women to some extent, who are concerned with men's interests, black men's interests in particular. We talk about the black manosphere. They're coming from different walks of life, different occupations, different areas geographically, different class status, different types of, they're coming from so many different walks of life. They have so many things to contribute. I think it would be a loss for me to prescribe what needs to happen when you have all these brothers with so much experience. You know what I mean? And whether we're talking about those who are highly trained in their given fields or autodidacts that come out of nowhere, how do I anticipate that? I think it's far more effective for me to just ask a question and have them participate. And if they want to pick this up and run in a particular political direction or another, I'm open for it. Because one of the things I tell people is I don't care if you're a diehard conservative or if you're a hardcore revolutionary, especially if you're talking about black issues. Neither one goes anywhere when you start to talk about the issues that we're facing, the issues we talk most about, even down to family formation, coupling, dating. These things at the base core of it are the foundations of pretty much every social ideology we deal with. And if we can't get to the point where we can get past that, then how the hell are we having conversations about whether or not we should be nationalist separatists or we should vote as Democrats? I mean, how do you get to that discussion if you can't even keep your household together because of the conditions in the society we live in? So that for me is the starting point to generate the dialogue, and rather than prescribe it, and invite discourse.
Hmm. So it is agnostic to specific policy, for specific level of government, specific level of organization, and whatnot. Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense to me. It is
And
like
yet,
the
and yet
science.
easily usable in each context too.
Exactly, exactly. It's like you have the scientists doing their thing, and then you have engineers that come and pick up the science and say, "Hey, I want to go to Mars," that kind of thing. And the scientists, I'm sure Isaac Newton never thought about Mars when he was talking about his force mass acceleration type stuff. Dr. Thunder, okay, on this same topic here of Dr. T. S. Johnson has laid out, okay, basically it's a compendium of ideas that get to the core of is what the problems are. Okay. Now we do have to do something about the problems. And if I were to create a construct that will force you to choose, like, hey, coalition, and somebody asked in the chat, a coalition with who? Well, it's a democracy. There's no need to identify people. There's some such things as, like for example, the 1990, I think it was 1977 Community Reimbursement um, Act or something like that, right? And it doesn't say black community or any particular community. It'll say things like underserved communities, poor communities, that kind of a thing. And we're going to put this in there and do that. And that was a result of a coalition, right? That cared about that kind of a thing. So that's the kind of coalition I'm talking about. So, Dr. Thunder, or what do you think about, or what are your ideas, perhaps historical perspectives as well, as to the ability of such coalition type movements, which are democratic and they're not going to say black. We know that it's going to be like this 1977 passed by Jimmy Carter Community Reinvestment Act, right? That kind of a thing. Um, what is your hope for that kind of approach?
So
Has it been
here's my
tried
issue.
and returned? Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's my issue. I mean, I've talked at length about my issues with so-called multiculturalism, and I basically see the same issues with diversity and inclusion. Some other issues with that, but the issue with multiculturalism is whoever the dominant society is, whatever the dominant society is, that dominant society, the members from that dominant society will be the ones that will decide which versions, which aspects of cultures will be represented. In our society, we're talking, uh, we're talking, uh, we're talking white folks, right? So white folks are going to, and in particular, an ultra elite behind the curtain, uh, elitist white person is going to be deciding which aspects of culture will be represented. It will have to be the aspects that are not threatening, that do not go against particular narratives that they're interested in keeping at the front of mind, right? So so you have that issue. And so if there are things that your particular culture, your particular society needs, that are not the, you know, not the usual thing, not the, as advertised, the front street, the stuff that they're comfortable with, then you're going to tend to get marginalized, right? And so so my issue, and I'm an academic, and I see the way that this diversity and inclusion stuff works, right? And what it seems to be doing is propping up aspects of, of course, propping women up artificially, and then also propping up things that are behavior based, and seems to marginalize folks that have been oppressed based on immutable characteristics, which in my mind seems to be exactly the opposite as the way that it should work. And so what I've decided is that this is not going to be effective. There's a lot of history suggesting that this is not going to work. It's not going to be effective. It's worked against us. There's a bait and switch that always happens. They use stuff that happens to, in particular, straight black men, and then they use the momentum to fuel whatever their actual agenda is. And that agenda tends to further marginalize us. So with that as the actual dynamic, this is not made up. This is not a figment of anyone's imagination. This is what actually is happening. With that as the fact, as the state of affairs, it seems to me to be necessary to take a sectarian tact. You don't have a choice. When you try to play ball, when you try to play, play friendly, play nice with others, when you do all of that, what tends to happen is you will be marginalized more. That's what this has taught us. So rather than continuing to make the same mistake, I think something like the work that Dr. T.S. Johnson does, and he's not saying this, I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I see this as a way for black men to congregate amongst themselves and to, and whatever political power or whatever they need to do to attain whatever political power, but to go after stuff that actually is going to help us. So stuff for us and stuff by us. That seems to be the only way out of this. As an academic, and I see what happens on all of these hiring committees, and I see what's going on with the demographics in these schools. And you can, if you want to, you can say, hey, well, we love everybody. We love everybody. That's great. Except for we still have a constant reduction in the number of black male students. We still have the issue with, 20,000 fewer black men in the academy than black females. We still have these issues, and they're not going to improve by us saying, hey, look, everybody, everybody's a human being and we love everybody. Look, I do love everybody, but me
Dr.
loving
Thunder,
everybody didn't help.
let me ask you this, because there's a bit of a straw man you're going after when you say loving everybody is the essence of doing this coalition thing or acting in a democracy. And I know what you mean. There's an aspect of that, right? But even if we say, okay, good, separatist it shall be. But the next thing will be, okay, I'm in a reality, in a dominant society. Even if I'm a separatist, some of us are quite pragmatic. So I'm going to speak for myself. It's like, okay, all right, Dr. Thunder, I'm going to sign on to your separatist movement thing. And as a pragmatist, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to find ways immediately to get things for us to benefit on things that have a broad base, right? If I'm making sense. That even if I'm separatist, I'm still going to be, shall we say, doing things that have a particular face. You said, okay, there's certain things that, the dominant society is okay with. Like, okay, cool. They're okay with creating certain kind of opportunity zones in certain places. Okay, good. I'm going to create my own political pack, give them support in that regard, Even though they say it's not black for black or whatever, I'm going to make sure that I'm set up to take advantage of it when it comes out. And I'm still acting in a separatist fashion, but there's no way you can be completely separatist. You could be, if you find, you and your group of people create some new technology that completely revolutionizes the world, and you become trillionaires, and then you become the dominant society, right?
Look,
That'll
look,
be
look.
that's one
This is what.
approach.
Look, here's my,
Dominating. But go ahead.
here's my approach. My approach is Jesus's approach. Okay, and that is you have the
Sacrifice.
99 here. You need to go after the one. And in this case, the one is black men and boys in particular. And so we need to laser focus on that until that becomes a strength. Then we can retarget something else. Because the strategy that we use by dumping all of this stuff in the same diversity bucket, you know how that ends up for us. We end up worse for the wear every single time.
Can I say something? Can I say something
Go,
really quickly?
yes, yes.
And
Go.
then I'll be
I'll come
done.
right to you. I'll come right to you right after this. But I just want Dr. Thorne to address this. In a matter of speaking, yes, it makes sense that you're going after the one, but I'm asking you with what? By what means? In other words, I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it's like, okay, if that's the program, then it's like, okay, well, it's a tall order, and you better have something on the books, or at least a general broad strategy of how you're gonna pick up yourself by your bootstraps and do this, or you're gonna be operating within a democracy, or. But if you say
Well,
it and keep on saying it, nothing's gonna happen.
I think it can start by just black men being unashamed to actually vote their interests, to being unashamed to actually prioritize, their own humanity. I think it can just start there, because we have been socialized to just be willing to take and accept any old leftover stuff. So
Well put.
anyhow.
I'm sorry. Green Gorilla, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a long time ago. Maybe 2 years ago, I said, "Hey, man, black men, you don't need permission to speak." At the current moment, there is a paradigm in the university system, and then it's matriculated to the corporate system. It's matriculated to the political system, where you have to toe the ideological line, or you get outcasted, and you get, quote unquote, canceled. Okay. At some
Yep.
point, you got to put your foot down and say, look, first of all, if all of this started in the academy, and I think that's the origin of it all. If you want to talk about where the virus, like what's ground zero for this, this kind of political disposition, is at the university. Okay. And it's gotten so bad now that at universities, if you're a faculty, if you plan to be a faculty member at the university, if you're applying for jobs, you have to fill out diversity and inclusion statements, right? And I know what it's like to read those, because I've been on hiring committees and stuff like that, where you got to read the diversity and inclusion statement, and it's all superficial nonsense anyway. But it's just like your dedication to the current paradigm, which is basically the intersectional paradigm. Okay, now upon face value, it looks good, but at the end of the day, what's the outcome and what's the impact? The impact is that people who are so-called privileged, they get marginalized even further than they are. So we got to begin to the academy. If all of this stuff started at the academy and the ideological grounds have been, or the lines have been drawn there, well, then that's where you're going to have to undraw the lines. Okay, you're going to have to operate how the academy is supposed to operate. Okay, or you're supposed to conduct activity in the academy the way it's supposed to be conducted, where there's an interplay, an exchange of ideas, right? And people get offended. Oh, well, it's the academy. It's where you're supposed to be offended. Like the idea of safe spaces. We need to get rid of those in the academy. What are you shielding people away from? Ideas that might harm them? Like arguments that are contrary to their own? Like, things have gotten so out of hand. So I get Dr. Thunder's his view, especially if you're a tenured professor. You can say things like this. So Ronald Neal, he can say what he wants to. I mean, for real though, Dr. Johnson can say what he wants, okay, without the fear of being fired for saying something that's unpopular. But like people, if you're a junior faculty member, man, you ain't tenure track. I mean, if you're not tenured yet, don't say nothing. So adopt the other brother's view. But if you already tenured, you got to speak, because who else is going to speak? Who else is going to say something?
Yeah, I don't have FU money, but I do have FU tenure.
So and this is why like people like Dr. Johnson, Dr. Tommy Curry, Dr. Ronald Neal are important. And this is a cadre of men, younger black scholars who are coming into the fold, and they will begin to voice their opinion and buck the system a bit. I mean, but even white people are beginning to buck the system, man. They're like, okay, people like Jonathan Haidt, Jordan Peterson, they started an organization online called the Heterodox Academy, like to get rid of all the rigid commitment to ideologies and the zealotry going on. It's gotten to the point where the university is not even like a place where people can exchange ideas anymore. It's like if you don't toe the line, then you got to be worried about your position, whether or not you're going to actually get a paycheck. That to me is, I just don't understand how people who are supposedly committed to the eradication of oppression and domination can create stifling conditions where domination and oppression obtains. I just find it ironic. But that's the American university system. And now it's filtered into the corporate structure, because now you got diversity and inclusion departments in places like Google, even on YouTube. Like you got to be careful about what you say, or you might get deplatformed or demonetized. Okay? This shit has gotten out of hand. Excuse me. That's the first word that's been expletive all afternoon. So let me stop talking. I'm done.
At the 2-hour mark, we're finally getting some.
Right.
But shout out to you. So Dr. Ronald Neal, okay, and perhaps you can help us out here. And the situation here is rather rich. It's interesting, right? I'm an engineer. I'm an entrepreneur in the construction industry. And it can be it's quite different from academia, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the things I ask and the reasons I ask them perhaps have to do with this difference, which is okay. Yeah, I heard it, but we got to build a damn wall, right? Okay, and the wall is due next week, otherwise we're not getting paid. That's the world I'm coming from, right? To put a caricature in it, Dr. Thunders put one thing on the table, say, hey, black men vote their interests. This is going to be one of the ways in which things move forward. If some people were, if I were to have my way, it'll be something whereby perhaps in the ideas side of things that Dr. T.S.R. Johnson was talking about, if black men, for example, consumed certain kind of information and found it normal, okay, in the technology entrepreneurial space, for example, found it perfectly normal to be talking about blockchain and these micropayments and these satellites up in space and all that crap from where the next trillion idea is going to happen, that will be, that's great. And by the way, you can venture capital that stuff and you can throw it out in the market, see what happens. That will be, for example, if towards the whole, shall we say, separatist ideal, that will be something that I would be hoping for, because I know that these things have to happen somehow, and you need money, you need influence, not just talk. So, Dr. Ronald Neal, the same question is on the table, and you can add to what has been said already, which is, okay, democracy, coalition building, community reinvestment act, and of this and that, and disadvantaged communities, blah, blah, blah. Or what other means of getting power and moving forward? What are your thoughts, Dr. Ronald Neal, and then BGS?
Yeah, I think that there's no one single path, and we have to look at the limitations of politics. Politics has limits, and the market has limits, and I think that we need to be clear on what the limits of politics are, as well as the limits of the market, and negotiate those limitations with respect to what we're willing to invest, what our capacities are, and everything related to it. You're not going to get, at least in the political world, no. I mean, you're not going to get you're not going to have a pure you're not going to have pure outcomes in terms of how things are arranged right now. And and the reality is that when I talk about American democracy, I'm just being generous. I'm going to be generous. I'm talking about it with a lowercase d, and because the assumption that there is a coalitional uh, openness, orientation, disposition that prevails in our current body politic is something that I find wanting. Just in light of what everybody has contributed, there's a great deal of tribalism there. So when we talk about that, diversity as we see it today is tribalism. There's nothing democratic about diversity. It's a very tribalistic way of
Mhm.
organizing the world, and it flies in the face of so many versions of democracy. Whether you're talking about ancient Greece or what have you, what we find in the U.S. Constitution or what have you, other versions in the world, European versions or what have you. It just flies in the face of that. You know what I mean? There's nothing democratic about what Joe Biden does and everything. It's sold to the world as democracy. No one asked the transgenders to deny their existence and say, well, you need to get, you can't be so sectarian because you can't, be a part of a coalition if you're sectarian. And no one says this to white women. No one says it to the LGBTQ people writ large. Hell, you better not say it to Jews. Okay, Jews they got rid of uh, Omar, and
Exactly.
out of Minnesota. They got rid of her based on their own sectarianism. Okay, and they did that in Congress. You know what I'm saying? Um, so I think we need to be very realistic about the political landscape that we're dealing with. And I agree with Dr. Thunder, and I agree with Dr. J and Green Gorilla. I'm going to invoke Donald Trump. What do you got to lose? You ain't got nothing to lose by being a black man and being unapologetically black and male in the United States. You ain't got a goddamn thing to lose. You've already had everything taken from you. It's not like, everybody has invested in you and what have you, and you know what the history is. You're gambling anyway, and so why not be unapologetically black and male? It doesn't mean that you become a very provincial and narrow, in terms of you doing things. You can be particular and cosmopolitan at the same time. It's possible. The Jews are the quintessential paradigm for that. No one is telling the Jews to not be Jewish. They're not going to tell you're not going to tell a Jew what to say to do with Israel and what have you. You're not going to do it. I mean, we've seen it within the last 6 months. What happened with Kanye West and Kyrie Irving and all this kind of stuff. So this notion that we got to go along to get along, and we got to be concerned about people's sensibilities and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's very idealistic. That's very just idealistic. Black men have to be mercenaries, and that's when it comes down to recognizing the limitations of politics and the limitations of the market. The market is rough. The market is brutal. The market is Darwinistic. You're talking about blockchains. You're talking about going to Africa. Well, guess what? You got somebody in Europe. You got some Chinese in Africa who want to do the same thing that you want to do, that you got to compete with. Not only that, you got native people in Africa, continental Africans who live there, born there. They want to do it, and they're not going to be so open to you coming over there and getting a piece of the market. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to have to deal with the kind of push and pull there. I just came back from Gambia. I came back from Gambia. I'm part of my mission in Gambia was to look at property, look at real estate, to make investments in Gambia. And do you know what I discovered in Gambia when I was there? That not everybody is interested in going into business, in an open way. with a black person from America. That's what I learned in Gambia. There are possibilities there. You understand? But you got the Europeans, you got the Norwegians over there. It's okay for a white person to come to those countries. Part well, I'm saying Gambia in particular. And I was in Senegal too because I had similar conversations in Senegal. So a white man can come into Africa and from whatever part of Europe and set up shop. And I talked to some of them, and they might have some problems, but they ain't gonna have no problems that some of us might have when we come in there. So there's competition. So the thing about it is that both the economic arena, and I don't care, you can have the tools and you can have the skills and what have you. Yeah, you're a black engineer, and when you got black engineers, you got a team of black engineers, but you got to have an environment that's going to be favorable to black engineers. You understand what I'm saying? And the hostile environment often forces these black engineers to go into business for themselves and to find other ways of existing apart from these dominant paradigms. So essentially, what I'm saying is that black men have to be strategic. We got to be mercenaries, and we got to be savages when it comes down to this stuff. And we can't play with people. We're going to be polite. We're going to be civil. We're going to be decent and everything like that. But politics is football. Economics is Darwinism. It's dog eat dog. That's the way it is. And again, you play fair and as much as you can or whatever, but you play hard, man. It's just we're in a dogfight, bro.
Hey,
Indeed, and we got a super chat there.
That's the
we
way I look
yeah
at it.
yeah, we do have a super chat, and we're also at time, so I think we need to get some
Yeah,
final thoughts and conclude. I want to respect the esteemed panelists, this all-star panel. Let's see here. We've got the only one John with the $20 support. Thank you very much. They had an Academy bro on another Manosphere channel recently. I was hoping one of you guys challenged him. If the Academy is the problem, y'all got tenure, then get at these dudes. Our champs of ideas versus theirs. Also, I wanted to mention, I'm not going to say your whole name, Raymond, with the $10 super chat. Thank you very much.
all right. Thank you very much. Okay, so with regards to the time, yes, we want to be respectful with that as well. I want to ask a final question. Okay, so it's been said, and I think that again, look, I'm an engineer, I'm a practical guy. I like all the things that you were saying, Ronald, with regards to hey, you gotta be this stuff is Darwinistic. You gotta be a savage. That's just that's like yeah, of course, right? Plus, I grew up in Africa. That's like just a given. Of course, you gotta be a savage, right? And of course, nothing's easy. No one's gonna grant you anything. Of course, the white man has his foot on your neck. That's what he should be doing. Okay, that's the way the world works. That's the animal kingdom. I didn't create it, right? That kind of a thing. And also, it's been said so far that the limited, shall we say, the limited uh, appeal slash power of the democratic approach, which then makes it more clear as to what the kind of savagery and work that needs to be done. Because if you're not going to kumbaya and play along for reasons that have to do with everything that's been mentioned, then hey, it's about time to start grinding down, creating that economic base, creating the technological base, creating the power, regardless of the Darwinistic arena or the dog eat dog arena that one may find oneself in. Okay, it needs to happen. So to I want to ask, sorry, Tia San Johnson, going to give final thoughts here, but we have Ron DeSantis, doing his thing in Florida, talking about equating basically Black history with wokeness, right? And saying that it has to go, right? So your thoughts about that, and is there something about the study of Black history that is overly focused on oppression? Because again, the last thing we just mentioned about economic power and such has nothing. Continuing to talk about oppression, okay? And since we're at the end here, there's shorthand, there's caricaturing going on. We cannot flesh things out, completely. But I'm just going to say in shorthand that hey, there's more to Black history than oppression, right? I think it's safe to say. Is there an overemphasis on that? what do you think about what Ron DeSantis is doing? Because after all, if there's going to be this focus on oppression, how the hell are we going to build this thing which we have to build, especially if we know that we're not going to do it through coalition? How are you going to dominate and conquer technologically, economically, if the main thing is to talk about oppression? Tia San Johnson, and your final thoughts, obviously, and go around the panel there.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I actually wanted to hear more from BGS and Gigi, and we didn't get a chance to get to them to the extent we should have. As far as what you're asking, with the different types, or the question of whether or not Africana studies can be reduced to just oppression, that's been an internal discourse to the field for decades, and so what we're seeing in Florida is only a glimpse of it. If anything, there's very much an ideological war going on, not only and a pedagogical one as well within Africana studies. Like, for example, the National Council for Black Studies, I'm in contact with one of their board members. When that organization sent out its support for the syllabus that DeSantis was critiquing, the board wasn't even alerted to the response, if that makes any sense. They didn't even know that this group was sending out this complete support for this syllabus the way it was structured. And according to him, there were quite a few black male faculty folk who were upset about it because, if you look at the syllabus, a lot of what's being referred to as woke is very much, black gynocentric ideology, feminism, LGBT, so on and so forth, and a lot of other nuanced kind of code words for downplaying, especially heterosexual black men's contributions to the discourse. So there's actually an internal war that's happening. A lot of it is under the table, and that syllabus is not a reflection of the diversity in the field. It's a reflection of one particular set of groups collaborating in their own interests. So that's the first thing. So I was highly critical of it as well. I do think Africana studies is necessary. I do think what's going on in the field, it should be broad. But this kind of cycling in on one approach, I think, is dangerous, especially when it's an approach that downplays and damn near eliminates black men. As far as diversity in the field, I think I've kind of spoken to that. There's a lot going on that's under the table. It needs to be out, and I think that's what, in my opinion, some of the brothers on this very panel are doing, whether they're formally in Africana or not. See, these are the kind of discourses that should be happening in the field, but you got a lot of people who are afraid to speak up because they don't have tenure, and then you got a lot of people with tenure whose career is still built, or whose careers are still built on appeasing black feminism, appeasing black feminists, worrying about offending black women and LGBTs. So even though they have position, they're not going to do it. You got a lot of them that have successful businesses that rely on black female support. So they're so hesitant to put forth a critique or an analysis that may offend, that they won't do it even though they have tenure. So there are all these factors that need to be dealt with and put on the front table. And I think it's going to have to start with some people with some testicular fortitude willing to say what needs to be said, and hopefully that influences even the next generation of scholars, which I can say is happening. Young brothers are coming into this, are far more interested, in my opinion, and being able to speak freely than putting themselves into shackles before they even get their careers started. So that is in process. But I want to thank you guys for inviting me. I enjoyed the dialogue, and I'm looking forward to hearing, what the brothers have to say as far as the closing of this. So thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
Dr.
thank
Tiesan
you very
Johnson.
much. Yeah. So, BGS, you didn't get a chance to chime in on the aspect of, okay, well, can identitarianism work with regards to coalition building? If you come out and say, hey, I'm unabashedly black, unabashedly male, here are my grievances, no one's going to listen to you. So, what is to be done? Okay, well, do we go full sectarian? Oh, if you want to go full sectarian, okay, then we need to shut up and start digging. Okay, we need to get it out of the mud, as they say, right? So then there's nothing more to be said. It's all action from this point on. Okay. And then also with regards to Ron DeSantis, woke studies, and your closing thoughts, sir. Yeah, all that.
Okay, I'll try to wrap it. I'll try to bundle it all together. Right. Dr. Johnson told me once that Gramsci said that under the right circumstances, a small group can actually influence politics, actually influence the society. Right. So it's timing, it's environment, and it's the right message. So can a small group such as black men, which is not really a small group. You got what, 20 million of us. Okay, can we influence the whole society? Sure, under the right circumstances, we can. And the timing, I think, is right for right now, right? Because of the, as I call it, the wave of history is actually moving towards us. So if you can be on their little surfboard and ride and get in that pocket, as surfers call it, as we surfers call it, right? Get in that pocket and ride that wave out. You can actually tilt this environment towards your, to actually make gains in it. So yes, you can. Identitarian politics can happen, can do it. I hate to bring it up. The Nazis did it in the 1930s after the crash of the worldwide crash of the Depression. Right? They did it. A very small group actually influenced basically the whole world for the next 13, 14 years. It can be done. And I just want to quote Andor, right? What Luthen said. Okay, we are forced to use the tools of our enemies against them. It is what it is. We're
Mm.
not big enough. We're not powerful enough. We don't have enough money, right? We're forced to use the tools that we have in hand against them. So just like Dr. Johnson was saying, we don't may not like Ron DeSantis, right? We may not like what he stands for. We may not like his politics, but guess what? At this point, we agree with him. Okay, we're forced to use the tools of our enemies against them, right? So to actually decenter intersectional feminism that's trying to take over Africana studies and Black history, is it's like the BLM did, use flat blackness for their gains. We can do the same thing as Black men. We can actually make the academy, the grounds of the academy, the fertile grounds of the academy, and actually fertilize it, and actually shape the environment so that people that don't have tenure, don't have fuck you tenure, fu tenure. Excuse me, Doctor Thunder, fu tenure. Uh, in other words, we're the ones who have to till the soil so that those seeds can actually grow. They can speak their mind, freely, and actually, for once, the what we call the permanent underclass, which are Black men, not Black men, but Black men, can have an opportunity at least these seeds to actually grow and produce. Okay, we have to do that. We did it 50 years ago. We can do it again. Just like Martin Luther King, he was forced to use the tools of his enemy against them. He did. We have to do the same thing. So, can an identitarian sector without coalition can do something? Sure, they sure can, under the right conditions. Okay, are these the right conditions? And do we have the right message and use the right tools for these conditions? Environment, environment, environment. I can't stress it enough. And with that, I'll cede my time.
All right, all right, all right. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. So,
Thank you,
Green
BTS.
Gorilla, you got the floor, you got the mic, your closing thoughts, you know what we're talking about, and you can add to it also the aspect of Black history, Black history studies or Black studies, perhaps focusing too much on oppression, because that directly dovetails with the aspect of action that needs to be done. Because in the world that Dr. Ron O'Neill is perfectly characterized as Darwinistic and dog eat dog, keeping talking about oppression is you're that's not a winning dog. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, different people have different opinions about whether or not oppression should be discussed and how long, and then what measures should be taken after you acknowledge that oppression exists, and so on and so forth. But like my whole issue is that if I just like to draw a sports analogy because men can understand it. Like if you're playing basketball, you got to keep your eye on what the other team is doing. You got to keep your eye on the defense. If you're, on offense, if you're on offense, you got to keep an eye on the defense. So the coaches are always looking at what the other team is doing and making adjustments, okay, and play the game. I mean, it just part of playing the game, assessing what your opponent is doing. But all too often we don't even think that we have an opponent. We're just out here like a bunch of individuals doing whatever is best for us, atomistically, and quite frankly, that really is not really working. Okay, but anyway, I mean, to the Rick DeSantis issue and woke studies and whether or not this is a good thing. I mean, to a certain extent, if you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think that African American studies and so-called ethnic studies or whatever you want to call it, it has to be revised because it's become dogmatic. and filled with zealots and tribalism. Okay, so we already know that Rick DeSantis and the people on the far right, they've been dogmatically anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, and bigoted. I mean, we've been knowing that. I mean, there's no secret there, right? But the problem is that the people on the left have become just as anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, and bigoted. You start talking about, well, men and women are different, and then they call you a transphobic hater and bigot yourself. So there's an impasse there, right? I think that both groups, both the extremists on the right and the left, they play into the worst elements of the American public, and they basically they appeal to the impetus or the proclivity in people to revert to tribalism, right? Again, I want to separate the baby from the bathwater. I want to reclaim African American studies. This really actually is inclusive, as opposed to the faux inclusivity offered up by white elites, white Eastern elites in the university system. It's like, okay, at some point you have to say, hey man, all that niceness. The reason I laughed when Dr. Johnson was talking, because he said testicular fortitude, and I put the laugh, emoji up real fast because it was funny to me. But it's just that, man. Speak your mind, man. Let them know that, like, the things you're saying, they're not accurate, okay? Or contest what they have to say. But, unfortunately, feminist discourse has been unchallenged for 50 to 60 years. Nobody said anything to these people. Now, but the shots have already been fired, right? Like one of the shots, a big shot, was Tommy Curry with the man not. That's a big shot, okay? All you got to do is just follow the troops, man. The guns have already been shot, okay? The question is, whether or not you continue to see some shots getting fired, or guys gonna tuck their tail and run behind. I don't know. Like, are you in this for black men, or are you gonna just be like, okay? Or are you working in the service of justice and truth, or are you gonna just tuck your tail and run and try to get your bag for your damn self and sell out like Judas for your 30 pieces of silver and your slice of the devil's pie? What you gonna do, man? So I'm out of here, man. I'll holler at y'all on the next one, dog.
Thanks, Gigi.
Indeed. So, Dr. Ron O'Neill, you got a chance to mention on the last round, and perhaps you can round things out further along with your closing thoughts, Doctor. And again, what we have on the table here is with regards to action that can be taken, an action that should be taken, and to be coordinated, organized, directed, energetic and effective. If one has decided that, hey, perhaps the political solutions are not the best, which generally speaking, I tend to lean towards economic solutions, right? Then what is to be done? Is there time to waste? What are the capacities that we need? Or one could at least even identify the problems. What are if we need people to be at a certain reading level, if we need to graduate more people in STEM so that they can take advantage of some of the material conditions that BGS mentioned about, right, with regards to different waves that could be ridden. But if you could give us perhaps an attempt at pragmatism. I know you're a theologian or philosopher of some kind, but I'm forcing you to get pragmatic for a second here. Go ahead.
Okay. That's what you're asking. Let me just say this, man. So there are no overnight, remedies, repairs, or solutions, or what have you. I want to say, and we have to dispel this notion that black men aren't doing anything. That all we're doing is just complaining and we're whining and moaning and everything like that. We need to move beyond this idea that all we're doing is just talking. There's so many black men who are not even in this space talking, living in the, doing things economically, doing things in institutions and what have you, that nobody sees, nobody hears, no one talks about. They're there, okay? What's the I can't. Oh yeah, Robert Smith, the billionaire who gave all that money to Morehouse. We might point to that one singular person, okay? But he's not alone in moving like that, okay? They just don't get the men who were on the ground doing those things. They just don't get the type of visibility as other people and what have you. So I think it's important to dispel the idea that we're lazy or whatever. And I wanted to say yes, on the ground, and I'm with you in terms of economics. I have no argument with that. I'm not anti-capitalist or whatever. I think that black men need to work on money and what have you. And I think that's the foundation. That's the foundation for a lot of our problems. Dr. Johnson's black male political agenda, which he crowdsourced. At the end of the day, that's about money, the lack thereof, resources, and all that kind of stuff. So you need a foundation and everything. But the question that you asked is a very, very big question, and it demands a multiple strategy approach, a multiple economic strategy approach. Not one solution is going to do it. We need the public sector. We need the private sector. We need the partnership with other groups. We must continue to work with white people. We must work with other groups. I've been thinking about. There's a concept I'm playing with now. I'm calling it racial capitalism. You know what I mean? And what that is that black people need to connect with everybody, regardless of what their backgrounds are in terms of partnering. Black men in particular. And again, traveling, being a passport bro, that's a part of it. You know what I mean? Even though, and here's the thing, this is helping you out. Knowing that there are differences between us in terms of so-called ADOS blacks and foundational blacks and continental blacks, knowing that there are differences there are different orientations and all that kind of stuff, and recognizing the limitations there. Um, One does not it does not preclude one from creatively engaging other blacks across the diaspora. All right, especially if we have common interests, particularly common economic interests. Okay, so that means that we need to engage. We need to engage each other creatively. Black men need to. This is part of the passport and the travel thing. Ride the wave of globalization, continue to go to the continent, Brazil, South America, wherever, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, and do business with everybody. That's just the bottom line, man. And then from there, um, you know, we can work practically on some of these issues. But the STEM thing you're talking about, and mathematics, these are very, very difficult problems for future generations, and we're not going to solve this stuff overnight. But we have the capacities to begin the process of confronting them.
Hmm. Very well put. Do business with everybody. Take advantage of the global marketplace that is here right now. There are many problems to be solved, many technologies that still remain to spread, especially in the biomedical area. I always like to preach that aspect. But let me back up, and then Dr. Thunder can take us out. But basically, started this particular last round here by talking about Dr. Tiosan Johnson's 17 points. And he rightly said it's not his, it's a compendium, a collection of ideas. And I say, hey, these things are particularly identitarian. Is this for a democracy? Are we supposed to present this to other people? And he said, no, this is for the core. Let's identify what the issues are. Okay, let's narrow them down. And then there can be the decision as to what can be done. Then we explored political situations. Dr. Thunder said, hey, that has a history of not working. Okay, and by the way, you can only put your vote into the already existing buckets of ideas that are on the platform. Okay, the planks on the platform that is agreed to by the dominant society. And the history show that if you do that, it tends to backfire against you. Okay, so there's got to be a separatist thing going on. Okay, good, which is a tall order. That means there's a huge task, meaning you got to get it out the mud. You got to do it because no one is coming to save you, and you're not trying to work with other people. So that is very interesting there in that front. But anyways, if we back up, we started this whole conversation by talking about a view of history. Okay, Is history primarily moved by these economic and material substrates? What is the role of the great man of history aspect? What about the ideas? What is the role of Black History Month? Has it served its role with regards to highlighting the contributions of African Americans? Can it now be retired? Can we admit to some progress? Which I know that there's an allergy to us admitting progress. It seems. And that's exactly why I asked that. To kind of coax the panelists to get to perhaps give us something different from what you might expect from them. And I hope that happened. We got a little bit different, got a little bit deeper. We actually mentioned thrownness and phenomenology and Heidegger. Okay, that's good stuff, Dr. Thunder. I don't know. What do you say?
Yeah, this has been a great show. It's been a great show. Again, let me personally thank Dr. Ronald Neal, Green Gorilla, BGS, and Dr. Tiasan Johnson for being the esteemed panelist on our Case Closed show. Why don't you say that line that you've been saying about Case Closed?
Case closed. If I remember the line, I say that this is the show where you get the highest level conversations on the most relevant topics. Okay, and I challenge you: highest level conversations on the most relevant topics, nowhere else but on Case Closed. Geopolitics, economics, history, psychology, philosophy, whatever it may be, and things are always presented in a simple, measurable, actionable way. That's where I come in. After all, I'm the moderator, and I like to keep things simple. I'm just an engineer, ladies and gentlemen. Highest level, most relevant. Shout out to the super sticker that just came in, Mr. Michael Green, keeping it live here as we go out.
Yes, and so just as a final thought, like I said, I've been a person that's been all over the place with respect to the way I view Black History Month. At some point, I saw it as being an insult. Like, why do we need that? Are you trying to say that I need something? You know, because I tend to be very, I don't need any pats on the back. I don't want any pats on the back. Like what you think I need a pat on the back? It kind of, I can kind of get that way. And so I saw it as that way, and then I started to say, well, if you're going to give us something, then why did you give us the shortest month of the year? It's like your feet have been drug into you're kicking and streaming, drug into finally giving us something, and it happens to be the shortest month, and now somewhat being shared by other stuff. And it's like, come on, man, when is this going to happen? And then I finally got to the point where I was like, look, this is something that we have, and yeah, so why not use it, to do something positive? And that's what today's show has been about. That's what the concert I did this past Thursday with Dr. Thunder Quartet was about. And I've done a number of Black History Month programs, concerts, and everything. So anyhow, I thanks for everybody participating in the show. Great job of moderating as usual, Ike, and make sure you come back for Getting Ish Done with Ike and Dr. Thunder. That'll be on my channel this Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And make sure you come back for all of the other assortment of things that happen on my channel. It's a lot of really introspective, thought-provoking, black men, black boys centered kind of conversation. Also, be sure to head on over to my new channel, Dr. Thunder Music. Spell the word out, Doctor. Just search for Dr. Thunder Music in a YouTube search, and you'll be able to find that. All of my music content is being migrated over there, slowly but surely, and so you can support by subscribing over there. Like the video on the way out. Sharing the video really helps. Comment, subscribe, join the channel, become a channel member where you get access to all archived videos. and do so at least at the master's degree level, and that'll give you access to everything on the channel, including any of the old music content and all that kind of stuff. It's going to stay on the channel. It's just all going to be put behind a paywall. So if you want to access any of the music content for free, you can do that over on the new Dr. Thunder music channel. But yeah, you got to support the folks that are willing to say the kinds of things that we say, especially academics that are willing to do that, because there is clearly an adversarial environment for folks, especially for folks that are saying, being assertive about pro-black men and boys subject matter. So anyhow, it's been a great show. Thanks for being here. Shout out to Ike. Make sure you go to Ike's channel and sub to his channel if you're not already subbed to his channel. If you like this conversation, you'll love what you hear over there too. So that's our time, and we are out.
Peace.
Peace.